So Deborah Farnsworth. Currently, I work at the University of Missouri Research Reactor. I'm the Senior Director of Reactor Operations. I started my career in the generation side. Actually, as a student, I co-opted at a nuclear power plant in Kansas. When I graduated, I worked at Westinghouse for 2 years, where I got to work as a contractor at a few nuclear plants, including one that was really close to my parents, called Comanche Peak. And so when I decided to be near my family, I went back to Comanche Peak and I worked there in several different groups. But my primary goal was to get a license as a senior reactor operator. And so I went through chemistry, through operations, and then I went into equipment reliability on the work management side. I was over performance improvement, nuclear oversight, and then the last thing I did was lead Comanche Peak through probation for their accreditation of their training program. And so at that point, I moved to Ameren and I worked at Callaway Nuclear Plant. And I was over work management and then operations. And then basically in my senior director role, I had support, which included security, reg affairs, IT, document management, and admins. And some other groups, and then I stood in as plant manager for about 6 months. I came to the University of Missouri Research Reactor primarily because it was something, it was a lot closer, first of all, but it was a new opportunity. And the main opportunity that I saw was being able to support this reactor, which has been up for 60 years, such that we can support building a new reactor. And so there is a huge initiative right now to build another research reactor here at the University of Missouri. And right now, the one I'm at is at 10 megawatts. We're hoping that the next one will be 20 plus megawatts. And what we primarily do, and what we've done in the past, is around research for the industry with regards to material research and how do neutrons or radiations impact materials. They've done everything from, irradiating things to understanding where obsidian came from so they can trace, it's called archaeometry, trace trade routes back, and how did you get something from a volcano in the middle of the United States when there are no volcanoes, all the way from South America. They even irradiated the O-rings from the Challenger to help understand better those things. But one of the things we do now is irradiating material that we can make medical isotopes. So either for diagnostics or for actually curing cancer. And so you've probably seen a few of those commercials starting to come out. Like Pluvicto is one that comes on, I think, with some of the NFL games for prostate cancer. And it's changing the way they can treat cancer. And so to be able to kind of see building a new reactor, which is a big, big deal for anybody in the nuclear industry, and being able to save lives, it just kind of was a culmination and a nice change of pace. So.
Sure. On that change of pace, I guess going from generation where you're focused on getting electricity out as much as possible and being consistent through to research and medicine, how has that changed for you? I guess, is it a mind shift in the way that you're operating?
It is. So the power side is highly regulated. And I think that they've grown out of the mistakes of, operating experience, right? And very, very controlled. And when we came to the research, tests and experiments are not allowed in the power plants, for instance, by tech specs. And here, that is the goal, is, what we analyze everything before we put it in a reactor. We have to do a reactor utilization report, but we are allowed to irradiate things that we would never, it just is a different mind shift. That's the goal, is to figure out what you can do and what you should do. So the knowledge and skills of people here are a little bit different and a little bit more agile than what they are in the nuclear industry, where everybody is very knowledgeable but very precise. And everything has to happen the same way each time, such that you're safe and reliable. And here there's a little bit more freedom and a little bit more in-depth knowledge of what it takes to get something moving. And so somebody had the wherewithal to say, hey, what if we were able to inject something directly into the tumor as opposed to radiation through the skin or using chemotherapy? And then they took it all the way from the thought all the way to clinical trials into people into production. And so we get to be a part of that entire journey while being here. And so that's just totally different. I would say it is a different work-life balance as well, mainly because there's just a lot more freedom here. And so I don't know. I eat a lot more sleep. That makes
Okay, which is always a positive.
Yes.
I guess looking back through your career, then it sounds like you've had lots of projects and lots of challenges. You know, what are some key standout ones that you can think back to that potentially shaped the direction that you went in?
At first, I'll say that the first major thing was getting my SRO license, my senior reactor operator license. Even as an intern, my mentor had been in ops, and I realized that I needed, if I wanted to have sustainable career growth in the nuclear industry, I needed to get that license. So that was probably the first little mark, but I learned a lot being in operations and understanding, you know, what goes on in a day in and day out at a plant, the fact that 24/7 means 24/7, but, you know, really understanding the rules and regulations as well. But it gives you a lot of knowledge and a lot of respect for how serious, you know, things can get if you make the wrong decision, if you don't follow procedures, or, you know, if you hope for very boring days in operations. You know, you don't want exciting days. The next thing that really shaped me was leading probation as the probation recovery manager. And so taking an organization who had kind of slipped on standards with regards to training and recognizing what the implications of that could be with regards to how we actually operated a plant. A lot of people just said, oh, your training program needs fixed, not tying it to the performance of the plant. But being able to see when we kind of look back at the data, if we had let our standards slip across the years, and that it had actually impacted the plant and the reliability of the plant, and in one case came close to impacting people's lives. And not understanding why it was so critical that those knowledge and skills be so systematic. That I think that gave me a lot of respect for why everything has been structured the way it's been structured in nuclear power. A lot of people think that people put in rules for the fun of it, and I'm like, no, there's a rule usually because something went wrong. And so leading probation recovery showed me a few things, but primarily, you know, pay attention to the decline. Because if you can catch it, you can fix things beforehand. It's really hard for people to acknowledge that, because if there's nothing broke, there's a real hesitancy to make a big change. And it's almost to the point where, like I said, you had to impact somebody's life before we went, what are we doing wrong? But it also showed that an organization can shift in a very short amount of time. So when we had the right people lined up as our communications champions, the right people on the team to make the changes. We had mentors in place. We had touch points with the entire plant. And I was personally really overwhelmed with how much they responded. I mean, we had our all hands on December 28th, which was between Christmas and New Year's. And I couldn't believe that my vice president said, no, we're going to have this. I thought, nobody's going to show up. Well, 500 people did. And they cared. And they really took it to heart. And I think to see an organization be able to recognize, acknowledge, and get through that grief process of we're going to make this better was pretty overwhelming to be able to see that. So those are probably two of the major markers for me.
Oh no, thank you for that. And you know, I think over the past, certainly this year, there's been lots of news about nuclear and the direction it's heading, and potentially how that's twinned in with new technologies in the tech world. You know, what are some of the biggest challenges holistically you think might be facing the nuclear industry at the moment?
I think that what I heard from the NRC, a few different forums, and we went to an NEI financial summit, is the fact that there's so many different technologies. We're not coalescing on like the tree like we did in the 60s or 70s, where you either went with GE, Westinghouse, or it was Babcock's, Wilcox, but they had a few different ones, and you had a really known design that you went with. And now we've got a lot of different great ideas, great new technologies, some that have been proven and some that haven't. And the NRC's they're needing to manage how do they get those approvals through such that we can support their growth and sustain getting, to clean energy by 2050. I know there's a lot of, we want to double the amount of nuclear power by that time, or there's these statements that are made, and I don't think that people understand or, what it takes to actually get there. And if you're doing it with 10 different technologies, the supply chain is going to be an issue because we're going to be ordering all different parts. The technology, the knowledge and skills that it takes is going to be all different. licensing operators is all different. I mean, I think the biggest thing that we could do is if we could actually say, here are the three that we think have the most viable options. They're going to give us the best bang for our buck. Let's all just sort of coalesce on that. Now, what's sad is there's a lot of businesses out there that may, maybe they're not the top three, but otherwise, we're not collectively coming together to make this successful. It's kind of everybody for themselves on what's going to work. So unless they got a big donor or somebody funding it, I think that that's going to be a huge challenge. I do think that the NRC is starting to acknowledge that if a technology has been successful elsewhere, that maybe they're not going to start from zero when they're reviewing the proposals. So when we are looking at a new reactor, a big thing of it is what we're conceptualizing. Has it been proven some way that we could at least not be kind of going out on that limb for the first time? Being first of a kind is a very scary thing. And so financially, safety-wise, everything comes into play because you don't know.
100%, I would agree. And at the moment, it feels a bit like the space race where there's so many different players that are rushing towards that goal and trying to get that technology license. But there's lots of venture capitalists funding those reactors as well. But sometimes you can bet on the wrong horse, as we've seen before. So it's going to be an interesting few years, I think, to see which direction it goes in and potentially who, as you say, might be the top three.
Yeah, and I think the question somebody asked us, and I'm not sure which conference was at, is why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? We've had plants and reactors that have run for 5-6 decades. Why is there such an urgency to have something so new? I think the only real reason is probably risk and the fact that the size of small modular reactors or nano reactors, you can really limit your impact to the public. And I know with the research reactor world, that's one of the big benefits we have here is our emergency preparedness, implications are next to nothing. Because even in our worst postulated, design basis accident, there is no harm to the public. And so I think that that's one of the reasons we're shifting. But it is a good question. Or you've already proven that this works. Why are we trying to reinvent that wheel?
What are some of the skill sets that you've seen that are in high demand, potentially still? I think it's probably a key few that always remain in high demand in the nuclear sector. But what have you seen potentially over the last few years that are high demand, but potentially hard to find as well?
Electrical engineering seems to be one of the hardest to find. And so instrumentation and controls is a piece of that. Because I don't think electrical engineers, there's so many options for them to sit there and think they're going to come and work on transformers or work on, power lines. Just not exciting, right? It's not, something that is like, ooh, ah. But the other side of it is instrumentation and controls seems to be a dying breed. Even the state tech down in, an hour south of here, they didn't have enough students to keep that program up. And instrumentation and controls are not just nuclear; they're across in any technical field. And they pretty much, if you don't have that working, things don't work. And so getting people, and I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, if people can't visualize what a job is. For kids, it's real easy to visualize what a cop does, what a doctor does. The instrumentation and control, people don't visualize. There's not a whole fancy job out there that they see on TV, but it is a very necessary field to have in any one of our work environments. And I think that that's something that if you have, you'll never be without a job. The other thing is being able to maybe combine technologies. And so we're dealing with nuclear manufacturing techs. So they really need to have sort of a science background, but also an ability to work in a hot cell and do manual things. I've got a radiations techs that need to understand reactivity and what we're putting in the reactor, but also be able to weld canisters together. So being able to find somebody that can do both sides of the technical on paper, but also putting it into practice. And I think what you find now is you get the people that are trained to put it into practice, and you get the ones that can do it on paper, but rarely do you get the people that can put the two together and be able to then problem solve. Those are some of the main things, but I also just think the pure technical fields, a lot of times that people see that as work, as harder work than, maybe computer programming. And so I really think we need to look at the workforce development that doesn't require a full 4-year degree. but that you're getting people that can get the electrician side, the mechanic side, INC tech, health physics techs, chem techs, those levels. And then they get into the workforce, they learn about it, and maybe a lot of places will pay for them to go get their degree. And then they can move into the leadership roles or into engineering roles from that after they've got that base. But that seems to be another group that's hard. So what you see instead is we've got programs for training that take high school graduates all the way through, because we're not able to find people in those categories.
Okay, and picking up on a point there you made about people knowing what a cop does or a firefighter, their jobs that are mainstream. I think people's first impression or exposure to a nuclear power plant is Homer Simpson in the control room, tapping away, rightly or wrongly. No one really falls into a career within nuclear. It's a targeted approach there. But people, when they're coming towards their education, sometimes they want to join an industry where they can see their impact coming in 2, 3, 4 years. Nuclear sometimes has a bit of a reputation where it takes quite a while for those changes to land. How do you think we can attract people that are coming out of education to go, a nuclear is a career path I can get into, but also one that I can make an impact in?
I think we used to do that through the nuclear Navy. And so I'm not sure why, but it seems to me that now either they're coming out and they don't want to stay nuclear. And so either we need to figure out why, and either say, no, that's not how we are, or we need to help the Navy make it a better place so they want to stay in that field. But I think it's about when we can convert people and attract them. We do it here a lot with bringing people here for tour groups and showing them on the nuclear medicine side how we can save lives. And I think that tugging on being able to say, who knows somebody that's had cancer? Almost everybody raises their hand, but putting it very, very tangibly. I think on the power side, we have to show people that this is a sustainable way of having clean energy. And I don't, and I know it takes a while to build, but if we can get that first SMR off the ground, for instance, and show it's going to happen, it's just going to snowball after that. And I think we won't have a problem attracting people. But we have to have the public recognize that making nuclear power is a much more sustainable way and a baseload way compared to wind and solar. And so it's sad, but the movies around making nuclear power, like Atomic Twister and things like that, we need to somehow get it to be a little bit more positive. I have started to see some TV shows that way. There was one where they were trying to get power back to the grid, and they were working directly with Seabrook. It was on TV, of course, but with the people at Seabrook to get their power back up, because they knew that nuclear baseload was something that we could get going. But it's got to change we've got to get people to see nuclear as the green energy as well. And I'll tell you what, a guy got up to speak from Germany at the most recent conference I was at. And I'm thinking, well, you're preaching to the choir, but that country kind of turned away from nuclear, and it's just like, they're going to miss it. They're going to miss the fact that there's so much other things that you can do with nuclear power, and there's so much sustainable, clean energy that they're going to end up relying on the countries around them, or they're going to have back to using coal and oil and gas. So I think we've got to change the public perception of what they get from it.
And again, looking back then, if you were to speak to your younger self at the start of your career, what advice would you pass down to help out?
I think I did fairly well. But the biggest thing I probably did was don't be afraid to take the risk and learn something. A lot of people will look at a job description, and if they don't exceed what the job description says, they say, well, I'm not applicable. I never held that concern. I said, I'll let them tell me no. The other thing was when proposed, although I did, initially say no to some of these things, I was talked into it, and I took it, was take the opportunities when provided. And so when they called me about probation or recovery, I initially said, I'm not the right person, but it was because I knew I was potentially moving away from that company. I was fortunate in the fact that the company that I was going to knew the criticality of it, and they said, we'll wait for you. And so at that point, I just took it and ran. But don't say no to those kind of opportunities, because even if they scare you, you're going to learn something from them. And you're going to learn whether you like something or whether you don't. You're going to potentially help an organization out, or you're going to learn how to do it better the next time. But don't be scared of those opportunities, and don't think that just because you only need, half of the requirements on that preferred list of job qualifications that you don't have what it takes to learn enough to get there as well. So that was probably the biggest thing for me, is I jumped at opportunities when I could. And, you know, I went to license class when I actually interviewed when I was 9 months pregnant. And so I think most people would have said that's just insane. But you know, my kids fortunately, they don't remember license class, which is a good thing, you know, because it was a pretty hard time. But, you know, sometimes you have to jump when those opportunities come around, because it's never going to be the right time. And so, you know, that's probably what I would tell myself. I try to tell others that as well. And I think the other thing is trust your gut. You know, you can make a change, and you can see what's going on, and you can try to be a part of to make things better. But when there comes a point where you are not successful in that, and it's taking you to a point where you're not as valuable or as effective in your job, it might be time for a change. And recognizing that before it gets to the point where it either seriously impacts your health or seriously impacts people around you, you know, being honest with yourself, but do what you can to make it better. And when you find that it's just not effective, you may not be in the right seat.
Thank you very much. You know, thanks for taking the time out for this People Power Profile series. I think it's some great nuggets of information there that will pass people on that are considering a career in nuclear, and hopefully it spurs them in the right direction.